Well, again, thanks to Peter for the introduction. The reason why the presentation is titled what it's titled, From Cost Center to Competitive Advantage, because of the last 10 or 15 years, I guess the view of supply chain has changed quite a bit. So 10 or 15 years ago, it was kind of seen as this necessary evil, it's just this thing you had to have, and it was just something that kind of chewed up a bit of cost. But over the last 10 or 15 years, it's transitioned more from a back office to a head office type function. And I'll give you some examples of why and how that's happened. Okay. Also, I'm going to be using a number of kind of commercial examples. Some case studies will be, to some extent, retail-centric, but I'll draw the parallels between those organizations and yours, because at the end of the day, the fundamentals are pretty much the same. You know, at the end of the day, you're trying to get the stuff you need in the right place at the lowest cost, to the level of service that you want. And there certainly are idiosyncrasies with any industry, but the fundamentals still apply. Okay, so I thought I'd start off by just kind of saying what is a supply chain and why is it important? And I apologize if some of this is very obvious in sort of motherhood, but I'll start kind of at a higher level and drill in. Would anyone care to offer a definition of supply chain? There is no right definition, by the way. There's no, standard definition that says this is what supply chain is. Would anyone like to hazard? It's okay, come on, someone say something, please. It's my birthday today, true story. I'm 30. Do you guys believe that? No, didn't think so. Okay. Anyone? What's a supply chain? What is it? Well, I'll give you the definition that I used to get from my friends. They'd say, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm in supply chain." They'd say, "Oh, it's warehouses and trucks." Right? Because I used to see the Linfox trucks that said supply chain solutions on the side, so you do warehouses and trucks. That's supply chain. Is that right? Is supply chain anything more than warehouses and trucks? Yeah? Like, give me an example of what else is supply chain other than warehouses and trucks. Yeah, good. Inventory management, forecasting, yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit broader than that. I mean, in some ways, you'd almost argue that the traditional definition of supply chain is more of a logistics definition, right? Whereas supply chain is something a little bit broader, which, funnily enough, neatly leads into the next slide, which sort of says, what is supply chain management? And we'll offer one definition. There are others. This isn't necessarily the right one, but I think the ones that are out there are relatively similar. It says it's the process of planning, implementing, and controlling the efficient and effective flow and storage of goods, services, dollars, people, and related information from point of origin to point of consumption for the purposes of meeting customers' requirements. Kind of sounds like economics, really, doesn't it? It's a big definition. So I guess our view would be that supply chain management actually encompasses marketing, finance, and supply chain as a function, also sometimes called logistics. I guess from the perspective of say a local council, marketing would be the part of the organization planning what to do that actually requires supply chain infrastructure. It's the planning end, saying this is actually what services we're going to provide, okay? This is actually what we're going to do, and then you've got a financial element to that, and then effectively a delivery element to that. And supply chain management is about planning, optimizing, and executing those functions, all right? Probably one of my favorite definitions of supply chain management is really what it is you're trying to figure out the right trade-off between flow and storage, right? And actually trying to optimize that relationship. So let me give you a couple examples. If you make cement, okay, so think about cement. What's cement? It's heavy, right? And it's kind of low value. So if you're going to design a supply chain where you're distributing cement, so think through it, would you have more stocking locations or less stocking locations? Yes, I heard somebody go, more. So, yeah, who said that? That back there? You're right. Nice work. That was good. He just hedged it a little bit. If he doesn't see me move, and I'm wrong, he won't know it was me. That's exactly right. You happy to share your thinking on it, or or not happy to share? Why would you think it's more?
The batch plants need to be close to locations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because basically there's a lot of sand in cement. If you think about the value of the product versus the value of the transportation, you see what I mean? So it's not very expensive, so the relative cost of the transport to the weight is high. So if you have fewer locations, you're shipping the stuff all over the place, aren't you, right? Whereas if you have more locations, you're holding more of it, but it doesn't cost much, that's okay. And you're shipping fewer times, does that make sense? Okay? Whereas what if you actually sell diamonds? Would you have more locations or less? Okay, you'd have less. Okay, so Michael Hill Jeweler up in Brisbane, their their primary distribution center. It's nice and unmarked, not far from the airport. It's really hard to find, even when you're trying to find it, they've given you the address. But that is their one distribution center for Australia, New Zealand, and North America. And they even will import stuff from overseas, like Canada, bring it over here, and then send it back. Because from an inventory perspective, it's just much better to do it that way, because you have less inventory, and diamonds are small and obviously very expensive, so the relative value of the freight is quite low. Does that make sense? So it's funny, those are real world examples, and they do exist in the real world. So that's kind of how I think about it. It's kind of a balance of storage and flow. Okay? The other thing about supply chain is that it can have a very substantial financial impact. And again, this is a sort of a commercial view of the world. And I guess we see a lot more sort of strategic planning now taking into account how supply chain affects these areas can actually deliver better value. So I won't go through all of this, but in short, supply chain has what you call a profit and loss impact, because it can improve profit because, and again, and I'll think of this of a different term. By the way, we do quite a bit of work with the Australian Defence Forces, so although I'll use some commercial terms, we've had a very strong relationship in supply chain with the Australian Defence Forces since about 1997, and from their perspective, it's not so much about profit, but it's about actually saving money and or generating surplus cash or budget that can be reinvested. Although sometimes that's a bit of a challenge, because the view is if we save it, we might not get it back. So how do we deal with that? So I understand that those pressures as well. But having said that, the Department of Defense has had a big supply chain reform program on now for about 3 or 4 years, because there were promises of billions of dollars of savings that were released in the media, and we've been engaged with them on that. But basically, if you think about revenue or even demand, supply chain supports that by making sure you get the stuff there that's needed. So if you have inventory in stores, to support maintenance activities, there's still a level of demand that you need to service that. And your customer in that case is serviceability or uptime, yeah? It's not somebody wanting to buy something, it's actually uptime, availability of an asset that you're trying to service, yeah? Okay? It affects costs, because things like your warehousing, your transportation, your order entry, cost of goods sold, has an impact there as well. It also has an impact on the balance sheet, because typically a fairly significant cash item is your stock, okay? And so it has kind of a multiplying effect on effectively the return to the business. I'll just drill into that in a little bit more detail. So the supply chain variable versus some of the issues we're talking about. So cost of goods sold, you can get some wins in that through better procurement practices, category management. Some more of the leading procurement practices can help you drive down some costs, okay, in that. The actual cost itself of then operating, order processing, transportation, warehousing, inventory control, and packaging. And then interest expense, you've got the carrying cost of inventory. And a lot of organizations don't recognize this, but holding inventory comes at some cost, because it's kind of like running a balance on your credit card, right? And the simplest way of looking at it, and again, not so sure how relevant this example is here, but in a commercial environment, they always have something called a hurdle rate. In other words, if I've got some money sitting around, I can at least stick in a term deposit and make 6%, right? So if I've got money tied up in inventory, I'm actually at 6% I'm not making sitting in my term deposit, right? Okay, so it's an opportunity cost. So you never want to make the value of inventory, you never want to make it cheaper to put it in inventory than it is to put it in an investment. So there's a 6% cost just on that. But then you have things like depreciation. Okay, you have things like insurance. Sometimes people borrow for inventory and so on. So it does have an implication there as well. On the balance sheet side of things, your actual inventory levels. It's interesting, inventory and cash, they're actually quite interrelated, because reducing inventory doesn't necessarily change the balance sheet picture, but reducing inventory does what? It generates cash. Generates free cash flow. And this is something that's looked at quite closely in the commercial world, which is inventory turns. Are you guys familiar with that term and measure that? Which is basically to say, how much volume of stuff do I have going out on an annual basis, and then about how much stock do I have to carry to service that? So if I've got 100 pieces going out a year, and I've got 10 in the warehouse, I'm turning my inventory over 10 times. In other words, it's the theoretical number of times it goes to 0 each year. And obviously, if you have 2 businesses or 2 organizations that have the same level of demand, but have different levels of inventory, well, one requires much more cash or capital to run. There's a funny little story around this, which is, imagine you have 2 companies, and again, I'll put this in a commercial context. You have 2 companies. This is company A over here. Sorry, I'm struggling without my whiteboard, withdrawals. So it's company A over here, and company B over here. Company A has higher profit margins. So when they sell it, they make a better margin. And this company over here has lower margins. But this company over here has faster turns than this company does, right? So the question is, how does the low margin business put the high margin business out of business? It's counterintuitive. The view is they drop their prices. Why would you do that? Because it then creates more demand, and these guys go, we can keep up, so we've got better margins, so they drop their prices. And the business will start growing really fast, and guess what happens? The one that has too much, requires too much cash, runs out of money. Have you ever heard of that expression that businesses, they basically grew so fast they went bankrupt? You used to not understand. It's like, what does that mean? How can that be possible? But the point is, at some point, no one will give you more money because you're growing faster and you're taking on more and more debt, and someone just goes, whoops, and that happens. You know, we got killed by our own success. So it is quite powerful. And I'll give you some examples of this in just a little bit, some real world examples. So the real issue here is you kind of want to understand your cost base, your cash base, and the sort of service you want to offer. And in just a second, I will give you a couple of examples around organizations that have thought through that problem quite well. But I'll just give you one quick example. Let's talk about inventory again. So let's say you have, I don't know, $4 million in stores inventory. If you take 25% of that out, okay, that's $1 million of free cash. So you've actually released $1 million of cash there. That does a couple of things. It improves your profitability. Why? Because if you're actually taking that out, if you are that stock is depreciating, you're not taking the accounting hit, right? Does that make sense? All right. If you also increase your service level at the same time, which almost sounds counterintuitive, how can you increase your service levels and reduce your stock? Well, it's all about the mix with inventory, by the way, because, you know, and I'll give you a couple of examples why, just a little bit. But it's all about the mix, so you can actually protect your service levels and effectively get that incoming side of things up. So if you've got your revenue up and the amount of stock you need to support it down, your turnover increases. So if it's your profitability times your asset turnover, you basically get a multiplying effect on what they call return on capital employed, which is basically saying, it's a financial term for, if I put $1 of investment in this business, how much would I expect to get back? So a business that turns its inventory 5 times and makes a 5% profit margin has what they call a ROCE of 25%. But if you only turn it 1 time a year and you make a 5% margin, your ROCE is 5%. Where do you want to put your money, right? So that ratio only means that, if that makes sense. It's just a bit of a tool to help you understand that. Okay, I'm sorry if some of these are tired and you've heard all these examples before, but just a couple. Supply chain strategy. So what were some companies that actually understood the drivers of cost in their business and actually changed the way they did business to take advantage of that? Well, what did IKEA do? Think about shipping furniture. When you assemble furniture around, what are you shipping a lot of? Yeah, air. Okay, a lot of air moving around, right? It's heavy stuff. So you get it there, and then you've got to pick it, move it around, and that's heavy too. And then you've got to deliver it to someone, and that's heavy. So what did IKEA do? They said, well, actually, the store is the warehouse. We're going to flat pack everything. So we'll flat pack it into the warehouse. You pick it, you deliver it to yourself, and you assemble it and feel like a moron because you can't, and then have to call the people to come and assemble it for you anyway. Not that that's happened to me, of course. But very smart, right? And it's a very big business. I don't know if you guys have heard of Zara, but Zara is basically a fashion label predominantly in Europe. And it was really interesting because a few years ago, the big trend, and still kind of is the trend, is for first world economies to sort of move all their manufacturing of textiles and stuff to third world effectively. So they contract it out, and the idea is, well, it's cheaper. But when you do that, you actually have to take your bets about what clothes you're going to make like 18 months in advance. So you buy materials, you cut the sizes, you cut the styles, you have it made, you have it delivered in, and you may or may not have got it right. So your production cost is lower, but there's so much waste. Because gosh, everyone really liked the size 10 of that, but they didn't like that. If we only had more of the size 10 of that, not all this other crap, we'd have had a better year, right? So what Zara did is said, well, why don't we just have manufacturing locally? One of the only companies that did that. So their manufacturing cost was actually definitely higher. So they had more up front. No one was doing that. But the point was is they could manufacture kind of to demand. If they saw that something was selling, they could just produce to it. They weren't investing all this stuff up front, right? And so they actually could follow the demand curve, and they didn't have all the waste. So higher production costs, but lower total costs, and actually grab the market. So again, you can see how if you can really understand the cost drivers in your own supply chain, you can start thinking of some ways to kind of tweak those levers. Adele, this is overdone, but this case study, and they don't actually do it quite like this anymore, so it's a bit of a dated one. But years ago, I used to always ship Adele people at supply chain conferences, and they say, "Do you know how we with why we don't have any inventory? People go, why? And they'd say, because it's our collaborative, real-time, optimized, eccentric, enabled supply chain into invisibility thing. Everybody go, wow, listen to all those syllables. I have no idea what he said, but man, I want some of that, you know? That's good, right? Does anybody know what the real secret was? Again, really smart. Their great secret was they convinced us all to wait. They changed the lead time. So they'd said, all right, you go on our site, you tell us exactly what you want, pay us, and then wait for your stock. Isn't that a great idea? Woo! So what they did is they shifted the lead time. So if you have a lead time, in other words, if you actually have a lead time of 14 weeks from your supplier to, say, your warehouse, and your customer expects it right then and there, 14 weeks before that point, you've had to take some sort of a guess about how much you want, right? But if you actually say, well, hold on, it takes us 14 weeks to produce, and you're willing to wait 14 weeks, then I have to hold any stock. Let's try that. And then we could actually sell that as a flexibility option, and away you go. So really smart. The other thing is that because there was an amazing amount of redundancy in the componentry supply market for computers, they could get away with it. You can't get away with that if you're in mining tires, because people are digging those things up out of the ground and putting them back on trucks because you can't get them, right? So that was the point. Is the return on assets for Dell was 16.9, Compaq was 2.56%. They both had similar margins, 21%, but Dell had inventory turns of 80. Right? Compaq had 20, just because we were willing to wait. And we didn't get a big discount for that either, do we? Yeah, interestingly. So anyway, just there's some good examples there. So if you break it back down to fundamentals, supply chain management is really about the rights, the right product or service, right place, right time, which clearly I'm poor at, given I was supposed to be here at 2:20. Right cost, right price, right quality, right quantity to the right specification. So we're trying to do things accurately and correct. So that's the fundamental goal. And then at the same time, you want to understand the cost it takes to deliver a certain level of service. And there are a number of ways of doing this, but this is some analysis we did for an organization that showed them this was basically the service levels to say basically, so think about it like a store's inventory. If you want to have a 95% availability in your store's inventory, okay, this is actually how much it will cost to do that. Now that was actually based on analysis looking at every single line they had, looking at a number of factors, and I won't genuinely bore you with that right now because I think it would bore you. But which is again why I find myself alone at parties and with the front rows rarely ever populated, but it's okay. So that was the service level that they wanted to hit, but we'd say, but what would it cost to go up by 1 percentage point, 2 percentage points? And so if you want to go from a 95 to a 98% service level, what would that actually cost? And you can actually model that and build that, and then once you have that picture, it's quite powerful because you understand the relationship between cost and service, right? And once you do that, then it's really powerful because you can start fiddling with the knobs. What if our lead times were 2 weeks less? What would that do? What if we actually could reduce our supplier minimums? What would that do? What if we consolidate shipments into a consolidation point overseas? What would that do? Make sense? Okay. And it does make a difference because this is basically benchmarks of, how do I describe this? The best in class versus the average by different industry type. So this is supply chain cost as a percentage of volume or revenue. And you're looking at costs like procurement, inventory management, inventory carrying cost, warehousing, transport, and customer service, okay? So what you're doing is building that picture up and saying, say in the manufacturing sector, the average performers, for every dollar of stuff they move that goes out to a consumer, 10% of that is in supply chain costs. Does that make sense? All right. But if you're really good at it, it'll be less than 6%. And I guess what you notice if you look across the graphs is that pretty much any industry you look at, the best-in-class performers have half the cost. Excuse me. It's my birthday. I'm just going through puberty now, so it's a little embarrassing. Oh, dear. I just realized this is being filmed, so I apologize. So the average performers will have twice the costs. Okay, so you'll see that across sort of any industry, and that's a pretty important thing. What's not on there is the not so best in class, the not so average, and kind of the genuinely average. They're not on the graph, right? But it shows you it's pretty powerful, right? Okay. what we've also found is if you start having a look at a supply chain and you do some modeling on the supply chain itself, our view is that you can usually find about 5 to 15% of savings by looking at things like transportation consolidation, different route planning, inventory consolidation, right? Okay, warehousing efficiencies and so on. So again, there's about a 5 to 15% saving typically that we see. And again, that's with looking at the whole thing and saying what sort of levers do you pull. All right, just putting that in perspective in terms of the potential benefit. Okay, this shows you some additional KPIs. It breaks it down a little bit more. Pardon me. And this is actually looking at retail supply chains. But see, I kind of get, I don't know, I think maybe I'm a little finicky with this sort of stuff, but I get a bit frustrated when people say retail supply chains, because you'll notice that Woolworths is in there, but Woolworths and, say, Supercheap Auto are quite different, are they not? How are they different? I mean, Woolworths, in my view, is actually, from a supply chain perspective, there's almost nothing like Supercheap Auto, because Woolworths is in a fresh business, rapid turnover. A lot of the stuff comes in local, right? Very different sort of a picture, whereas Supercheap's buying from overseas, they have 14 to, some cases, 26-week lead times. Okay, very shallow, broad inventories, like many of you would have in your storage inventories, right? Lots of items, a few of them move pretty quick, but you've got a whole bunch of stuff that just goes on in sort of infinity, You've got a couple of these, and it's been there for a while. It's a bit dusty. I think we need them. What's that for? Remember there was some, at one stage in defense a few years ago, they found a whole bunch of parfait glasses and anvils, in the warehouse. Just, guess you want to be a blacksmith and eat ice cream? That was your place to be. Very, very high customer service. So if you look at the KPIs, delivery in full, might range between less than 90% to 98%. Delivery on time, less than 93 to 95. Delivery in full on time, above 93. By the way, again, this gives you an advantage. If you're somewhere in the middle, you're kind of on par, but if you're below that, that might represent a bit of a problem. That's the cost differential. We've gone to that. Look at that cash-to-cash cycle time, 10 days to 50 days. So that's kind of the Dell example. How long does it take you to get your money back once you put money in? That's about how much stock you have, how long it takes your customers to pay you, and how long your suppliers are willing to wait before you pay them. Okay? And then the turns. Okay? So again, just highlighting that there are some real differences here and some real benefits if this can be done well. All right. And taking that a step further, I guess we often find that inventories can be reduced by, sometimes in the order of 10% to 40%, depending on the business. Okay, so again, all of these have service, cash, and cost implications. Okay, let's talk about some trends. Any questions so far? Is this kind of what you thought you were going to hear about, roughly? Yeah? Okay. Some people are nodding, some people are looking at me like, this guy's from outer space. And that actually suggests most of you are actually thinking that, but thank you for your honesty. It's good. All right. I mean, gosh, it's sort of like, what's changing? Well, what isn't changing at the minute? It's pretty incredible how rapidly things are changing. So a bit of an aside. Do any of you guys subscribe to National Geographic? It was an edition, I don't know, maybe about 6 months ago, probably longer actually, about a year ago, that actually showed a graph of the population. Any of you seen this? It's freaky. I mean, like if you look at it and sort of go, ooh. But basically, I think it starts from something like, I don't know, it's 20,000 BC or something, but the graph kind of goes along like this, and then right at the end, just, and it goes from something like 200,000 to a million to currently about getting close to 7 billion, up to 9 billion, and then it's supposed to plateau in 2050 about 9 billion. But literally the graph goes like this, boom, and it's just all about basically medical science and the Industrial Revolution. But it is mad, and there are some people alive who would have seen the population triple in a lifetime. It's crazy stuff. So you sort of go, gives me the goosebumps. I don't like to think about it too much, but anyway, I just thought I'd share that with you as a bit of levity. So sourcing geographies. What's happening is you're seeing that China is now starting to go up the quality of life ladder. Things that you would have once had produced in China, particularly technical goods that have highly skilled labor. And because you also now have higher funding costs for things like inventory, things that you would have once offshored, literally 6 years ago, you wouldn't do that now. Okay? So you're seeing a lot of organizations actually changing their sourcing geographies to places like, as it says, Vietnam, Thailand, India, Philippines. A lot of that textiles, auto components, skilled labor. And China, as many of you are probably aware, has been buying up lots of infrastructure in Africa, buying up ports and things like that. So watch that space, right? Because they're just basically going for what's the next effectively undeveloped area that's going to offer a cost advantage. So interesting. As a result, we're seeing a lot of clients set up global sourcing offices. So a client of ours has been Supercheap Auto, Super Retail Group, and we've been working with them since 2003. When we started, they were 30 stores, one business, and about 100 million in revenue. They're over $1 billion now. And I just, what was that, 10 stores, was it? Oh, that's 10 minutes left? Wow, my gosh. All right, gosh, I guess I'm having lots of fun. You guys having fun? As I am. It's my birthday, right? Woo! Okay. I can't believe that happened. All right, I'll talk even faster, because you'll take more in if I do. So global sourcing offices, we're seeing a lot of those. So Supercheap's got one in China. We've got clients that have them in Singapore and so on. It's just so they can try to buy the best, given that things are moving. They're so fluid in that space. Online retailing, do we care? What's going to be interesting is I think it'll change things a lot, but online retail sales now, only about 5%. But as it says, the growth is supposed to be about 27% of the 50 billion in retail sales growth projected over the next 4 years. Prices are about 19 to 64% cheaper online. What we're seeing is cross-channel capabilities being developed by retailers because customers now want to basically, shop on the phone, pick something up at a depot, bring it home, or they actually want to go to the store, see it, say, can you deliver it to my house? So you got to think of all the different supply chain models this is creating and all the sort of variability and flexibility. Offshore fulfillment, you're seeing the reason why they're so cheap, online retailing, is they don't have the footprint here, right? So there are a lot of offshore fulfillment centers being set up to take advantage of the fact that we don't pay GST on things less than $1,000 and all that good stuff, right? Exchange rate's not hurting that either. Also, last mile delivery considerations is how do you actually get it? If you buy a barbecue or a play gym overseas, how do you get it delivered to your house? There's actually a business called Big Post that has actually set up depots all over Australia, and basically they're now going to the online retailers, say send it there, and the guys will come pick it up, or they'll deliver it to you. So there are all sorts of new business models developing as we speak to take advantage of that. Technology sophistication. Basically, you've got to have it to survive. So all those companies that we talked about that do things well are more sophisticated in technology in terms of the optimization, the planning, the execution, automation. Absolutely essential that you have that in place. I know the guys here can help you with that. We're seeing things go local and global at the same time, right? So energy costs are going up. That'll sort of change things, will it not? Exchange rates kind of causing a bit of havoc with things as well. All right, okay, it's rapidly changing. Disaster recovery, floods, volcanoes, me blowing my entire presentation time in the first third of my presentation. I'm now trying to recover, maybe with humor. Some of you are laughing, thank you. But that certainly is happening more and more, and people are actually building more redundancy into their supply chains as a result. Is it bad, is it, see? I thought this last session would be quite dry. I just do it to keep myself sane. Financial concerns, global debt concerns. So the US, there are some projections, and I shouldn't laugh because this is a bit of a worry, that at the current rate of current account deficit in the US, at some point the interest repayments will exceed GDP. Okay, that is not a happy thing. So the next 10 to 20 years, but everyone I know in the financial community is saying that it's not, we won't necessarily have a giant explosion. We might, but the point is it's going to be a lot harder than a lot of people think for about 10 or 20 years. It's just the reality of it. It's sobering. What that does is it puts funding cost increases in. It means it's harder to get cash, and that puts a lot of pressure on your working capital and your inventory, right? Because that's just chewing up cash. Okay. Okay, I guess I've been asked to speak about trends and challenges. To me, these are kind of the same thing, but obviously why we have challenges in the supply chain and why the opportunities exist that I've talked about is because usually supply chains are set up on one set of assumptions, and every time they change, right? So all of a sudden the garden gets a little bit overgrown over here, and ooh, not getting as much sunlight here, but we don't necessarily look at it on a regular basis. So we usually start with a set of assumptions. The other thing is supply chains tend to grow piecemeal. Oh, we need another side over there, we'll do that, and we'll just service it out of that one. We'll put another side. Then all of a sudden you've got to step back and say, wait a minute, would it be better to sort of change the flows because we'll actually get a better result, okay? That's why there are opportunities. It's complex, isn't it? Lots of stuff. Geez, there's a lot of options. It's totally complex, all right? So when we first started this business about, I guess about 15 years ago, one of my partners was at his barbecue and his friend said, oh, what do you do these days? He said, I'm in supply chain. He said, oh, I thought you did something clever. Because it's moving stuff around, buy to, replace to, no problem. Skills and sophistication, geez, there is very little good education, I think, in the world, but also here for supply chain. It's not an established discipline. In other words, there isn't sort of a set of standards that one has to achieve to be called a supply chain person. And I think still a lot of supply chain still has the context of warehousing and transportation. So it's a bit broader, and you need more of that to get that level of sophistication. Also, there's been a bit of a commoditization of technology and processes. So one of the things you have to be careful of when you put in systems is that they don't get just configured like the last person that looked like you. You just got to make sure that they actually do get set up in a way that actually suits your business, not based on the quote-unquote blueprint. Okay, 5? Okay. All right. And supply chain management, as I mentioned before, is about trade-off decisions, but they're often made independently and without all the facts. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you guys for a favor because it is my birthday. Would you be willing to go an extra 5 minutes? Just making a note. Is that okay? Otherwise, stuff's great. You love it, don't you? All right, good. We'll play a game. All right, simple example. Let's do it. Let's do a bit of a trade-off. So this is a supplier and this is a warehouse. So this is the supplier to your store. And the question I'm asking you is, what's the quantity that you want to order? And how often do you want to order? What things do you think about to make that decision? Really simple, isn't it? What sort of things would you think about? Lead time, that's right. So in other words, if that's my refrigerator and that's my lounge room, and I'm getting a beer, I'm just going to get one. I don't need to get a slab. Yeah. We'll talk. That's right. Thank you. Okay? Exactly, lead time does make a difference. That's one thing you think about. What's something else? Yeah, okay. So spoilage goes into this general bucket we call carrying cost. Absolutely. So there's a cost associated with holding stock. If your stuff is explosive, if people want to steal it, if it costs a lot to insure, if it's got a short shelf life, the carrying cost of that is higher than a transformer that sits there for 50 years and never gets used. Does that make sense? Okay? So if I have a perishable explosive product, I'm not going to order tons of it because it'll go off in 3 days, right? That doesn't make any sense. So I'd order what? Less, more frequently. Yeah? Good. What else? Well, there's a notion of demand, right? Yeah, demand. That's the universal signal for demand, Good. I picked that up, it's good. I don't know, it's just, keep going in traffic or demand, one of the two. So there's that. Well, there's another one could be, what if the supplier has a minimum? You have to order a certain amount. That often happens, you're ordering from some factory in South Africa and, half a day's production run is a year's worth of demand. So, we can't order one. What about the cost to bring it in? So do you hear where this is going? This is basically a trade-off between storage and flow cost. Do you hear? Okay? But the point is, and what a lot of businesses do is they treat everything the same. They say, well, we'll have a set of rules for all our items, but I would argue that you'll have consumables, you'll have spare parts and so on, and those should all be treated a little bit differently. Okay? So segmentation is important. I'm now standing between you and caffeine. I fear for myself. That was an evil laugh. The other thing, this is interesting, if you look at this, this actually shows the difference in, let me make sure I get this right. Yes, that is, as retail trade goes up, what happens to inventories? And I love this because as inventories go up, as our demand goes up, our inventories go down, and as our demand goes down, our inventory goes up. You know why? Because despite the millions of dollars people have put into these systems, they still do, and I don't mean these systems, I mean systems in general, but what they actually do is they forecast based on averages. Have you heard the joke about the two statisticians that go hunting? So, there's a bird or whatever in a tree. Well, let's say target practice. I don't like, necessarily killing things, although you're going to kill me. There's a target over here. One statistician takes a shot, and he's 3 meters off to the left. Another statistician takes a shot, he's 3 meters off to the right. The third one goes, we got him! Bullseye! So that's the thing is when you average, what happens? If you saw demand was going like this, so that's and if I were to ask you to take a pen and show me where you think demand's going, you'd go like that, wouldn't you? But guess what an average does? And guess what? If the demand's going down, it gives you the same forecast. No wonder we have inventory imbalances, because stuff that's going up, we've got too little of, and stuff that's going down, we've got too much of. It's right there. Boom. So Supercheap Auto is a good example of a business that actually implemented some more sophisticated forecasting and planning processes and systems and absolutely blew the market wide open. And you know that story. But But their view is they took out, about 17% of inventory. They added 30 stores with $60 million in revenue with no additional inventory investment. They avoided the need for additional DC capacity because they optimized the flows. And as I said, they spent $100 million opening new stores in 3 years with only a $40 million increase in debt because they self-funded it. And the story I used to tell is, remember what Repco's share price was? Well, it was something. At one point, you couldn't buy the shares anymore because they couldn't fund the debt, and they got bought by private equity and took off the market. These guys' share price tripled. So, pretty similar example that shows you how powerful it can be. All right. Benefits of technology. It is absolutely important. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. But where can technology help? Optimization can help you work out supply chain design, inbound and outbound flows, location and sizing of facilities. You can have planning support for forecasting and planning, what items you need to have in the stores and so on. Execution, so things that will help you automate transportation planning, warehousing, procurement, and also just the transactions, the EDI. So if you have a lot of touches, that's the thing you often do, is just count the number of touches. Map it yourself, go back and say, when I order this, how many different touches are there? Are there faxes? Are there phone calls? Do I call up? They send it to them. They send it. Map it out, and then see if you can draw up a new process that eliminates some of the touches. What if we could send them an electronic order? It got ticked off this way and sent to us, and that will actually save you a lot of heartache because it'll save you cost, it'll save you time, it'll save you errors. Yeah? You guys agree with that? Yeah. Okay. And then you can automate it as well, which gives you process efficiency. And all I'm saying is that everything we've talked about in supply chain, it's big, it's complex, there's an opportunity. If you're doing this sort of stuff manually, you have a big opportunity, I would suggest. Okay? Make sense? Okay. Yeah. So just in summary, as we do think the opportunity here is real, this is sort of a list of some of the opportunities that we've already discussed throughout the presentation. As rapid as I've made it, and again, my apologies for that. But again, we can see inventory reductions, supply chain cost improvements, spend reductions given procurement solutions, and so on. And there are questions that you really need to ask yourself, I think, are where are your greatest cost risks and opportunities? Where could we have supply chain failures? Where do we actually spend a lot more than we need to? Do we actually have to have all these stores that have all these slow-moving items in it? Could we consolidate the slow-moving items? Okay? And so there are a lot of strategies that you can put in place to actually take some cost out. And some of them are quick wins. Some of them you don't, they're not. It's not rocket science, but technology then can help you get that to that automation and sometimes to the rocket science layer as well. Okay? What is the optimal supply chain configuration? How much do you need to invest to sort of deliver the service you do? And how can you proactively continue to reduce your cost curve, product cost, transportation cost, and so on? Okay, so hopefully that's given you an extremely rapid overview of why supply chain isn't just a call center. It can be a competitive advantage. I suggest there are probably opportunities for you. There will be some low-hanging fruit. Technology is important to get to some of the higher-hanging fruit. And in the mortal words of Forrest Gump, that's all I have to say about that. Thanks very much for your forbearance. Sorry about that.